Alaska sits on the map of the United States, but it obeys rules no other state recognizes. Separated from the lower 48 states by an entire country and by vast wilderness within its borders, its scale alone breaks every template for how states are supposed to work. Why does normal America fail here? What hidden force makes Alaska operate like a nation apart? The true answer starts with a line on the map most people never see. A single glance at the map reveals what words can barely convey. Alaska is not simply far away from the rest of the United States. It is separated by an entire country and a continent's worth of wild, empty land. No border crossing in the lower 48 states compares. Between the last town in Washington state and the first Alaskan city, there are hundreds of miles of Canadian forest, mountains, and rivers. The border itself is not just a line, but a buffer zone, one that turns the idea of a neighboring state into an abstraction. What matters most is distance. Inside Alaska, the sense of detachment only deepens. Communities are not linked by highways or familiar ribbons of pavement. They are divided by vast stretches of wilderness, dense boreal forests, glacial valleys, and mountain ranges that run for hundreds of miles without a single road. For many towns, the nearest neighbor is not another city, but a glacier, a river, or a mountain pass impassable for much of the year. Distance here is not just a fact of geography, it is the architecture of daily life. The state capital, Juneau, cannot be reached by car from anywhere else in Alaska or even from the rest of North America. To move between villages, people rely on small planes, ferries, or, in winter, snow machines gliding over frozen rivers. In some regions, the only connection to the outside world is a weekly mail flight. This is a place where the concept of a local community is redefined. School sports teams travel by plane to compete. Medical emergencies trigger airlifts, not ambulance rides. Even the Postal Service bends to geography's command, with packages arriving by air or sea, sometimes delayed by storms that sweep in without warning. In Alaska, distance is not a background condition. It is the system that shapes everything. The state does not simply sit apart, it operates on a different axis, where separation is the rule, not the exception. Here, the map is not just a record of borders, but a diagram of the barriers that define daily existence. Alaska's dimensions defy ordinary measurement. Its landmass stretches across 663,268 square miles, making it larger than Texas, California, and Montana combined. If you lifted Alaska from the map and laid it across the lower 48, its western edge would touch California, while its eastern border would brush the Atlantic coast. The sheer size is not an abstract curiosity. It is the first gear in the invisible engine that powers everything else here. Scale does not just add distance, it multiplies every challenge. A single highway might connect two cities in another state, but in Alaska, the same stretch of road can vanish for hundreds of miles, swallowed by mountains, ice fields, or tundra. The state contains more than 100,000 glaciers and over 3 million lakes. It holds the highest peak in North America, Denali, rising 20,310 feet above sea level, and the low, icy stretches of the Arctic coastline. Within one set of borders are temperate rainforests, barren tundra, and sprawling river deltas, each demanding its own rules for survival. This magnitude breaks the model for how states are supposed to work. In the lower 48, supply chains run on predictable routes, trucks, trains, and highways. In Alaska, every mile of distance is a logistical multiplier. Emergency response times stretch, road maintenance becomes a Sisyphean task, and the cost of delivering basic services soars. A gallon of milk or a box of medical supplies must cross a continent, then navigate a patchwork of airstrips, ferries, and weather delays. Policing, education, and healthcare all face the same arithmetic: more land, fewer people, and barriers that no amount of funding can erase. The map here is not a grid of cities and roads, but a living diagram of obstacles. Scale is the silent architect, making the familiar American systems of connection and service collapse under their own weight. In Alaska, the land is not just big, it is big enough to rewrite the rules. Alaska's ground is never truly still. The state sits astride the Pacific Ring of Fire, where tectonic plates grind and buckle, unleashing more earthquakes than anywhere else in the United States. The Aleutian Arc, a volcanic chain 1,200 miles long, stretches westward in a broken crescent, each island a product of forces still at work beneath the surface. On March 27, 1964, a magnitude 9.2 earthquake struck near Prince William Sound, the most powerful quake in United States history. Anchorage was torn open in seconds. Entire neighborhoods dropped by as much as 30 feet. The coastline itself shifted, reshaping bays and harbors, and the aftershocks lasted for weeks. But the land's volatility is not limited to what happens underground. Alaska is a kingdom of ice, home to more than 100,000 glaciers. These rivers of frozen time carve valleys, split mountains, and grind rock to powder as they move. The Juneau ice field alone sprawls across hundreds of square miles, feeding glaciers that thunder into the sea. Glacial ice sculpts the land, and it also stores and releases water, shaping rivers and flooding lowlands when it melts. Here, permanence is an illusion. The ground shifts, the ice advances and retreats, and the landscape is always in motion, never finished, never safe, always being rebuilt. Rivers in Alaska do not behave like the neat, meandering waterways of the lower 48. Fed by thousands of glaciers, these rivers carry so much fine sediment, glacial flour, that the water turns an opaque turquoise or milky gray, thick enough to choke boat engines and clog water filters. The Copper River, the Susitna River, and the Tanana River can surge with tens of thousands of milligrams of sediment per liter during summer melt, making them among the most sediment-laden rivers on the continent. This mountain dust travels for hundreds of miles, swirling through braided channels that shift course with every season, making navigation unpredictable and reshaping floodplains year after year. Along the coast, water obeys a different set of rules. In places like Turnagain Arm, the incoming tide can rise so quickly and powerfully that it forms a standing wave known as a tidal bore, racing upriver and for a moment reversing the river's flow. Twice daily, that bore disrupts schedules and redefines boundaries, forcing coastal communities to plan travel and transport around the tides themselves. Above ground, time itself fractures. In the far north, the sun can stay above the horizon for weeks in summer, then vanish for weeks in winter. Work, sleep, and school bend to cycles of light and darkness, not the ticking of a clock. In this environment, both water and time become forces to be navigated, dictating when people move, rest, and gather, and reminding everyone that in Alaska, the basic rhythms of life are set by systems beyond human control. More than 80% of Alaska's communities remain out of reach for any car or truck. The Alaska Department of Transportation and Public Facilities oversees a network where the sky and sea do the work of highways. Bush pilots flying single-engine planes over endless forest and tundra become the lifeline for villages scattered from the Aleutians to the Arctic. On any given day, a pilot might deliver groceries, medical supplies, or a teacher, navigating by memory and weather, not by road signs. Barges and ferries trace the coastline, connecting settlements that would otherwise be cut off for months at a time. Even the state capital, Juneau, sits hemmed in by mountains and rainforest, accessible only by air or water. The Tongass National Forest, nearly 17 million acres of temperate rainforest, stretches across the southeast. Here, roads vanish beneath moss and ferns, and the forest itself sets the limits for where people can settle. In these places, wilderness is not a backdrop, it is the dominant system. Salmon surge up rivers in runs so massive they feed entire ecosystems, carrying nutrients from the sea deep into the interior. Bears, eagles, and even the trees depend on this annual migration. In Alaska, human presence is shaped and often humbled by the scale and rules of the natural world. The map is not just unfinished. It is actively being drawn and redrawn by forces that make ordinary American systems feel out of place. Today, Alaska's map is still being drawn by earthquakes, by ice, by rivers that rewrite their own courses. As climate shifts and resources gain urgency, its wild geography shapes every decision. Here, nature, not politics, still sets the terms. In a changing world, that unfinished frontier may matter more than ever.